tried to get this to work. And of course, again, there's useful justification for that, because remote viewers, if you could get it to work, could find drug shipments, caches of terrorists' arms or the terrorist cells themselves, all sorts of things.
Have you seen an example of remote viewing that worked in front of your eyes? Have you seen anything?
I can't go into too many details about that, but I know it works. Yeah, I've seen it produce results which are, shall we say, significantly higher than chance alone would allow.
And I assume the details are classified. Is that
I'm not going into the details of any of that, but I think it's no secret that, of course, the CIA and the US Army had their programs, right, codenamed Stargate, Sunstreak, and Grill Flame, right, and they had some successes. And certainly, I'm less convinced by that, okay, but certainly some of the American remote viewers did produce some extremely credible results.
Right. And in terms of ghosts, does it mean anything to you in terms of spiritual sense if these are really credible reports?
It depends, because on one school of thought, you could say this proves that we survive death. But I think other people will say, well, no, because these things don't really interact in any meaningful way. So maybe it's little more than a visual echo down the timeline. So it's not necessarily sentient, even if it's real. So I don't think, even if we could prove the existence of ghosts as a plain fact, that in itself wouldn't, I think, resolve the debate about survival.
Yeah. What about the Bermuda Triangle? Any views on that? Any ideas?
I'm fairly sceptical about that. I mean, it's an immense area of sea, and it's home to some of the most violent and changeable weather systems on the face of the planet. Right. Actually, a statistical analysis of other parts of the ocean will turn up clusters of aircraft crashes, loss of shipping, etc. And I mean, some of the studies into the Bermuda Triangle have even brought in losses which occurred outside. Some have occurred during wartime, for example. And again, the idea that this is attributable to some supernatural force, when actually submarines and mines may well account for some of the losses of shipping. Again, I'm not convinced.
Now, if you guys have tracked UFOs and there is credible evidence for this, well, someone must be piloting them. What can you say about the pilots?
Not much. I mean, I suppose it's a reasonable question. I mean, if some UFOs are structured craft from somewhere else, even if there's no one flying them and they're remote controlled, obviously someone built them. So we're obviously, I guess, as the believers would say, you only have to be right once. Out of all the hundreds of thousands of UFO sightings, only one of them has to be extraterrestrial. And then we're in a whole new board game. And then we're dealing, obviously, with other life forms, other civilizations. And then that again poses the question, well, if there's one other intelligent civilization in the universe, aren't there going to be others? So again, now, to me, I'm one of these people that until I get the smoking gun, I'm not going to talk about this in terms of anything other than possibilities. So to me, this is interesting speculation. I guess I hope it's true.
Based on what you read in the National Archive files, what would you speculate? Based on what people have said?
Well, on the Ministry of Defence files, which we're in the process of now releasing to the National Archives, there is no what I call spaceship in a hangar smoking gun.
Right.
On the other hand, as I've said earlier, there are plenty of cases of structured craft, speeds and manoeuvres that seem ahead of what we can do. UFOs photographed, videoed, sometimes by the military on gun cameras. UFOs tracked on radar. So there's a case to be made. The way I see it is this, though. You could almost use a legal analogy and say that what we're actually doing with this is that we're bringing to the court some eyewitness testimony, which the jury may or may not believe. We are bringing some circumstantial evidence in terms of, for example, the photos and the radar tapes, but they're subject to interpretation because one person's spaceship is another person's weather balloon, one person's radar return is another person's glitch. Exactly. So we're bringing to the jury a case which could go either way. What we're not bringing to the jury, certainly as far as I'm aware from any of the material in Britain, is, and we have here, Your Honour, DNA evidence. We're not presenting the jury with something that certain. So in looking at the evidence that we have about UFOs in the British government, I would say it's that mixture of testimony and circumstantial evidence. Now, some juries may convict on that, others may not. And that's my position. I'm undecided.
As far as I know, the MOD has released files about abductions and encounters that people from Britain have experienced.
They're in amongst the UFO files.
Right.
There are certainly cases which you would categorise as contactee cases. There are also cases which you would categorise as abduction cases. Now, it's a very small number. If people are reluctant to report...
By small, how small do you mean?
Oh, a few dozen over the years. Part of that is mistrust. I think the sorts of people who've had these experiences tend to get to a UFO group before they get to the Ministry of Defence, unlike the straight UFO sightings, where someone will sometimes just phone a report through to the local police station or the local Air Force base and we'll get it. With the entity reports, whether they're contactee or abductee, people tend to find their way to the civilian researchers and groups. Then they kind of get drawn into this idea that you probably don't want to report to the MOD because they're the bad guys here. And running through certainly the UFO community, as opposed to the wider public, is this prevalent idea that we are the bad guys, that we know all about this, we're sitting on it, there's a conspiracy, there's a cover-up, and we're keeping the truth from the people.
So these dozen or so abductees or contactees, whichever, what kind of things have they described?
Oh, the typical range of material. The contactee cases, very much typical Space Brother type encounter with Nordic-looking extraterrestrial entities who radiate warmth and love and carry messages of peace and sometimes warnings about what we're doing to our environment and such like. The abduction cases, again, pretty much the same thing as researchers like Bud Hopkins, Dave Jacobs, John Mack would have. Although I guess John Mack had a slightly different take on it to Bud and Dave. But yeah, the abductees would report the typical scenario, being taken against their will onto a craft, finding themselves paralysed, subject to some sort of intrusive non-consensual